Hi, this is Brennan Pertzer, and I'd like to welcome you to the video edition of the Blue Continent podcast. Today we have a special guest who is an international development expert and the senior director of the global development at the McCain Institute for International Leadership. He is also the former country director of USAID's mission in Georgia, the country of Georgia. And so that's Fron Nahzi, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to him. Enjoy. So, how's your evening?
Oh, I'm sitting here writing proposals.
Oh, that's always fun.
But by this time, I'd actually be over this stuff. But unfortunately, if you live
Well,
by proposals, you die proposals, right?
one of the questions I was going to have for you is how did you achieve this level of success? But 9:30 at night, still writing proposals here.
It's not, yeah, we can talk about that. It's just, yeah. Um, I'll tell you what I talk about. Maybe much more interesting.
Sure.
Um, my interest is that my generation owes the generation after me an explanation of what we did wrong and what we did right.
Oh my God, this is a great topic. I'm loving this.
And the reason for that is that if we believe that by 2050, climate change is going to have the impact that it will, the generation after me doesn't have the luxury of making the same mistakes.
No.
So if you want to take it in that direction, and you say why, you know, and which also is the reason why I create the podcast, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So if that makes sense to you, rather than me sitting and telling you how I spent $100 million over the last 30 years, so on.
But it feels good to know that you're one of like the 1% of Americans or people in the world who ever got a chance to spend $130 million.
Wow, it's just, there's a lot out there, trust me. It's nothing to brag about. It's, and you find quickly that when you don't have it, you don't have as many friends as you thought you did. So
When it's all gone,
yeah,
right?
it really is. So anyway,
No, I mean, I definitely want to talk about that.
yeah.
First, I'd just like to welcome you to a
Mhm.
discussion here. Um, Mr. Fron Nahzi, are you from Albania or Kosovo? Because I've read articles talking about Kosovo originally.
I'm a New York nationalist.
You're a New York nationalist. Okay. I've been out to Kosovo and I have good friends there. I love the place.
I was born in Kosovo, came to the United States as a refugee way back in 1969. I was stateless. And then I went back to the region in 1991 when the revolutions were taking place, where I was heading the Soros Foundation.
Yeah.
And then I lived and worked in that region for since 91 until about 2011, I think it was, 2012, I forget now.
Okay. Some perspective there.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, that certainly has had an impact on the way that you see the world, right?
Well, what really impacted me, if you're going to ask that question, so let me backtrack. So before we started the podcast, I said, when you have money, everybody likes you, right? So when you had a major foundation, as I did at a very early age, way back in the early 90s, when I was the head of the Open Society Foundation in Albania, and Albania being one of the most poorest countries in Europe, I could do no wrong, obviously, because I had so much money. And so after the fall of communism, that's really when the real work of civil society started. And the question that nobody asks, and which you should ask,
Okay.
what made you a civil society democratic expert? I'm 28 years old, I'm out there. Nobody. Eighth grade civic class. So suddenly here you are running this huge foundation. And what I did was, in fact, my lesson and where I was impacted was when I met the dissidents from Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, the
Mm.
ones who literally led the movements. And that's when they actually introduced to me a lot of things that I should have known better at the university level, which is the whole idea that the pendulum was swinging very quickly to the right way back in early 90s.
Mm.
And in the name of democracy, you could see actually dictatorship or autocratic, or now as they call the illiberal system. So during my time there, it was suddenly I was getting this incredible education from these amazing dissidents. And that's when I realized that the foundation that I was running was not about really just nation building or state building. We were supporting the government at that time, but supporting the minority voices.
Huh.
And especially what critical voices, trying to create that critical space.
Yeah.
And so what I realized was that the foundation at that time was still an activist organization.
Mm.
Meanwhile, I'll stop in a second, the world had moved on because the wall collapsed. And so suddenly the lines between civil society and government and foundations were blurred, and everybody sort of came together. And
Mm.
the donors pushed that,
Wow.
meaning the international donors, USAID, the Soros
Yeah.
Foundation, and said there should be more collaboration between governments and civil society
Hmm.
because the bad guys have been thrown out, so we're all working for common good. When that happened, a lot of us were questioning, saying, "Wait a minute, um, where is that line? Where does it begin?" You know.
How long was that period of time where everything seemed to converge?
In 1994, it happened. Consciously or subconsciously, I don't know, but suddenly you saw all the major donors, the Europeans, USAID, and the Soros Foundation, literally almost say, look, we can't go on playing this activist role, and rightfully so, I mean, if you really think about it.
Hmm.
We need to actually start building up these new open societies.
Hmm.
But the ramifications of that, if we jump really quickly today, Viktor Orban, Hungary,
Yeah,
Romania, Poland, I can go on and say a
absolutely.
lot of these people came from the civil society sector, but look where they are now. Uh, Rather than I'm still old school, saying that really we needed in my opinion, right after the collapse of the wall, NGOs as activists was still very needed. It was too fresh for us to move quickly from a closed society, open society in a matter of 20 years. And be a lot
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really shocking transition for anybody, and trying to find your footing so that you can move forward securely is as really hard. I mean, Kosovo is going through that absolutely right now still. Where are they going to end up? I mean, I read your article just recently that was about their young president who'd come in. Is it Kuti? Is it? Is it?
Again, Kurti.
Yeah, Kurti, and his short attempt to put things together, and just what a train wreck, right? What's going on right now?
Well, Kosovo is an interesting. I mean, you said you were there, so it's an easy. So Kosovo, if we were talking about in development terms, and you would ask me, does Kosovo have a strong civil society?
Mm.
I say maybe civil society, no, but a very strong civic society. And you say, well, give me an example. Well, the example is that after the war, 1 million ethnic Albanians were pushed out of Kosovo. They went to neighboring Albania, Macedonia, Montenegro.
Yeah.
During that time, while they were residing in the neighboring countries, not one crime was committed. Second example is that when the international community said, okay, now, after 3 months of bombing, come back, they all came back.
Mm.
We'll get about the ethnic Serbs at the moment, unfortunately, what happened to them.
Mm.
But for the most part, a lot of that, the Kosovars really had a very strong social fabric and network that kept this stateless state going for so long.
Yeah.
The second thing, the third thing that Kosovo gives us is that in the first elections after the war,
Right.
the Kosovars voted against the Kosovo Liberation Army because they knew that they didn't want these gangsters in place.
Yeah.
They knew better than, and they actually warned everyone saying, so this is one of the few cases where society actually had a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
But as you know, I mean, you've been around long enough, is that what we have is the formation, not only in Kosovo, but everywhere throughout these developing countries, what we call the formal and informal system. The formal being elected, the informal being the business sector,
Yeah.
uh, who suddenly get involved in elections and creation of governments. And then the other part of it is that the international community pivoted away from Kosovo, especially the United States, and allowing, in a sense, this almost failed state on the cusp of becoming a failed state,
Hmm.
led by the former Kosovo Liberation Army figures, who turned it into their own little bank, if you want.
Yeah.
And so Albin Kurti, this new person who came in, is an interesting figure because he was part of the Kosovo Liberation Army. He started off as being, very, in the civil society sector, trying to also cooperate with the Serbs and so on. And then he kept moving more and more to the left as a left-wing nationalist, where we find him today, where he doesn't want to deal with Serbs, and it's about unification. And
Hmm.
but he became what he is today, a modern politician, by saying, look, what do I need to get elected? And he was able to point to a number of little issues so he can actually raise the constituency. And what's the biggest issue is, in fact, corruption. He says, you vote for me, I will get rid of all these gangsters once and for all. So even people who think he's an extremist saying, look, it's much more important to get rid of corruption and rid of these gangsters
Yeah.
than anything else. So
We call that is like wedge issues, basically, ones that kind of leverage yourself into office in that way. Something that did strike me when I was over there was how pro-American, profoundly pro-American the common person is there. And it was so funny because you compare that to all the other countries in the region, and you say, for example, obviously Serbia, right? They're really not so pro-American, but the Kosovans, they really credit the United States with the creation of what semblance of a state that they do have. And there's a statue of Bill Clinton there in the city, and my friends insisted that I go and take a picture there, of course, as an American. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting that you're in a part of the world where all the other countries around you are Christian or Orthodox countries there. And there's one Islamic country, Albania, it's the same in Albania. I had the same experience there. And people love Americans. An Islamic country that loves Americans is very, very hyperbolic.
I'm gonna
And
be careful. One thing, so since we're having this conversation, uh, there's a tendency to say just because predominantly people are Muslim in Kosovo and Albania and Bosnia, but they tend to be Islamic state. Far from it. Their beliefs and their traditions and so forth, are
unique, right?
very. In fact, as the Albanians, I'm not going to sit here and try to promote the Albanians, but what makes us unique is that we're Albanian first and religion second. In my case, I'm Roman Catholic, but my last name is Muslim.
Okay.
But it's not, so that tolerance as far as, and there was never identification by religion. And the Kosovo example is very good, where the previous leader, pacifist leader, Rugova, made it very clear that he did not allow journalists and else to describe it as a Muslim state, which unfortunately that was the term used for Bosnia, which unfortunately the New York Times got it wrong there. But in any event, so they were very careful to say, look, we're not sort of being identified by our religion, we're identified by our so-called nationality.
Sure. Well, no, I think that's a great distinction to make. And I was just amused as an outsider by that dynamic that it was kind of like the reverse in my mind, considering that Albania as a country has had some in the past tenuous relationships with some of its neighboring countries, obviously because of the way that it really focused on its nationalism for so long, right? And but
Albania's never had a, yeah. I mean, I can't think of, I'm trying to think of one war that Albania's had with its
no,
neighbors.
they never had a war. It's just that their the relations that they had with the neighbors, they had drawn a wall around their country, and nobody knew what to make of them, I guess you could say.
Well, I mean, 50 years of isolationism that took place with the communist dictatorship there from 1945 all the way to
Yeah,
1991. Right, but that was, you also had some of the things to blame it, and you know, this Moore was sort of a sick, bizarre individual, you
too
know,
much.
than any kind of other strategy. I mean, think about it. He created 500,000 bunkers if they had nothing to eat.
Yeah,
But if the question is reversed in saying that, is Albania afraid of Greek or Macedonian or Serbian? You know, it's probably Greek has more claim on southern Albania than the Serbs have, for example, on northern Albania, because there's no relationship
yeah,
whatsoever. Um, so you,
sure.
but you know, I mean, Albania itself as a country, as far as international development is concerned, more money has gone proportion to Albania than any other country in Eastern Europe.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and a lot of good Peace Corps folks have been serving in Albania up until recently. You know,
Right.
they were all sent home like everybody. I was in Ukraine myself. Um, I wanted to get back over to we were talking about changes in the our current situation in international development and some of the things that you would have liked to see us do differently. Obviously, mistakes that we've made, for example. You indicated you had something to say about that.
Well, it's look, it's not. I wish I had said this earlier. Um, so my generation, we went into international development. We went supporting good governance, civil society, anti-corruption, and then there was this little thing called environmental issues, which we used to throw a bone to every once in a while,
Hmm.
and and you'll kind of say, well, go out there and do your thing, without really. And
Hmm.
what's embarrassing for me is that after running, I don't know how many, a few $1 million projects in my career, that in 2012, 2013, I was running this huge USID project in Georgia. And there was a lecture given by a professor from Arizona State University, um, about sustainability.
Hmm.
I've never heard that lecture before, where he said by the year 2050, if we don't do something about it, that this world is going to change. And this is an issue that actually is not identified by culture, by boundaries. It's not it's unfortunately a thing more produced by the industrial states, but unfortunately, it's the undeveloped countries that will suffer more. And it was the first time in my life I saw 100 students absolutely engaged in the conversation. And that's one of the first realizations I had, was that, uh-oh, I'm the older guy in the room and sort of out of the. So, in my opinion, the current generation has a timeline of 2050. So, for me, the four issues right now in international development, one is obviously, climate change. The second is related to cybersecurity. And then the other two are my generation, which is corruption and nationalism. We've seen that with it. But these first two are actually very different, and they're moving very quickly. And most of my generation, meaning those of us over 50, really don't fully understand these two too well, especially digital, how the digital space and cybersecurity and the social media and so forth. I don't have a Facebook. I don't have a Twitter. Yeah,
Oh no.
yeah, yeah, right. For another reason, but in any event, so the thought was that if we look at international development, we have to look at a perspective. We can't do it from the 90s approach. That the generation going into it, unfortunately, doesn't have the luxury of making the mistakes that we made. If this deadline of 2050 is real, and so let's pretend for 1 second that it is for real. It's bet, and we'll. If
Okay.
that's the case, then really there are a lot of things. And so my argument has been recently in saying, look, anything that we do, we can't look at the issue of climate change sustainability as a project. It is a cross-sectorial issue. It's in the rule of law about judges being able to prosecute people who commit, how do you call it, pollution. And then the other factor, which has come in the last 10 years, is the whole issue of cybersecurity and
Mm.
social media.
Yeah.
That's about how open society and closed society has literally been taken, it's been taken to online. It's a virtual fight that's taking place. And we're losing on both of these fronts, along with the other two as well. But let me stop there.
Oh, well, in that case, I mean, there's a problem. These are all these problems are connected. You're talking about the corruption, for example, and the corruption has kind of hamstrung our government from taking the actions it needs to take to try and bring the other issues under control. Doesn't it feel like, you've got a situation where our government is not functioning in a decent or productive way to address our issues, because I would love to see a study about how much lobbying goes on, and the amount of money spent on lobbying in the United States, per capita, for example, versus several other countries that seem to be functioning a lot more efficiently than we are.
But that information is available. I mean, that's very simple. In fact, the U.S. government will give you that. You just go into the
Oh, I can see
form.
I can see the US government, but I was saying I had a hard time looking up lobbying information in France, for example, when I was there. I would ask people, I'd say, well, what can you say about how many lobbyists, registered lobbyists you have in Paris? And they would say, what's a lobbyist? We don't have those. We don't have, of course they do.
Right.
But
Well, I mean, look, for me, I think this is the other issue is like there's one of two ways. One is obviously the responsibility of the government. And then the other one is the responsibility of civil society and say, look, we have an obligation outside the government to do something. Those of us like myself who spent his whole lifetime working in the nonprofit sector, uh, I was making sure that the government did not take away my rights, and that meant allowing us to do what we thought. And quite often it was actually, especially in the early 90s, it was closely aligned what the United States foreign policy, what Western European policy. We all wanted to bring down this dictatorship. But at the moment, it's become extremely complex for various reasons, which we don't have time to get into. But obviously, it's vested interest, it's also economic interest. And then the whole issue is that, we're talking about corruption, which is worse, a corrupt dictator or a dictator that's not corrupt, but is massacring 500,000 people. A lot
well,
of
that's
policy,
certainly a consideration, yes.
so that there's a lot of like diplomats who turn around and say, look, we know these guys are bastards, but they keep instability, So
Yeah.
in the middle of all this space, it's us, civil society, trying to do and push things forward a little bit and hold people accountable.
Well, so when we're talking about trying to push government in one way or another, I had a friend today who said on Facebook, said that they were disenfranchised a bit, or at least really disappointed that Trump hadn't made a stronger commitment to help the people of Hong Kong, right? So you're looking at the Hong Kong situation develop, and I said, it's sad. I would love to see a strong statement supporting the rights of democracy and people in Hong Kong. But when you have a president whose word means nothing because he throws everybody else under the bus after he no matter what he says, as soon as it's politically expedient to do so, I feel like his words are worth less than nothing at this point. So
Well, I mean, rather than the personal stuff, and if you look at right now, and I'm not saying nothing that you don't know or your audience doesn't know, which is right now, there is actually a very popular movement for populists around the world. It's about isolationists. It's about take care of your own. Who cares about everyone else? I mean, we moved far away from the early 90s. Let's create a democratic world to look, who cares? It's not our problem. Let's take care, let's look at the stock market, make sure our 401ks are doing well. So, even someone like Trump, I mean, he has amazing amount of support, not only in the United States, but also by a lot of these other governments that have run, that say, look, we believe the same thing. Why would you want to get involved in our
you're
thing?
talking about Brazil and Orban and
Those are two of them, right?
even Johnson. Yeah.
So, and this is the situation we're in at the moment. I was saying to you earlier, there are four major issues for me that are very urgent. The one issue which we're not dealing with, which is is the climate change, I said, and the other ones we still haven't figured out this whole thing by cybersecurity or social media, which everyone seems to be using benefiting, which tie to the other two that we know quite well, which is
Yeah.
that.
They're all connected.
So they are, and then the question that I try to raise on my what I do for a living, or saying, well, what are we going to do about this?
What
And
are we going to do about this?
well, I mean, look, to your credit, it's podcasts like this. I mean, movements in Central and Eastern Europe and elsewhere started by a group of 5 or 10 people talking about it, about what do we do. And the more, in my opinion, that we learn how to use the social media for good causes and be able to talk the way you and I are and open it up for more discussion, and that people don't buy into disinformation and we give a counter narrative, I think then, we have to go back to what I'm saying is the grassroots.
When we look at populism and nationalism, I think it theoretically could be possible to carry this momentum without, as long as it didn't turn on a minority group or something and say, look, it's all their fault or anything. Because if you looked at it and said, look, what Jimmy Carter said in the 1970s when we had the oil crisis there, and he said, look, we need to be oil sustainable, right? Or we need to not be depending on anybody else. And if we looked at it that way and said, look, the American economy, we're going to make sure that we produce enough food for ourselves and we produce enough energy in a clean way, and we need to take care of ourselves. Like, imagine a world where every country just produced, everything enough for themselves, and they only exported the things that they do incredibly well. Like the French only exported their wine and their cheese, right? Because nobody can make wine or cheese as good as they do, right?
Wow. Well, I mean, I hate to say this, Brezhnev, when he was, I think, the Minister of Agriculture in the Soviet Union, tried that, where he took the various republics and said, Moldova, you're going to be responsible for wine. I believe when I told you Moldova. And he chose another republic that would be responsible for it. So it didn't work. It really, so.
I got to tell you, though, Moldovan wine is great.
Well, look, you like it, I'm not saying it's bad, but it didn't work because certain parts, and anyway, but look.
The Soviet Union was too large anyway, though.
Well, I mean, to your point, you're talking about the whole world and each country taking on what they do really well. But look, the one thing is it's just me, and I'm not saying that you're wrong or whatever. But far from it, for me, I just say, look, I mean, it's about individual rights.
Okay.
I can't say a French person, a German person, or that I'm an Albanian person what they should do and not do. The only thing is that I'd say is that if we can agree on some basic principles. And I think one of the things that's missing in today's conversation is that what are the values that we all sort of subscribe to? Can we just be good? You don't have to like me. For example, we just be good neighbors.
Yeah. I mean, couldn't we have a global citizens Bill of Rights or something, right? And you just say, look, we're not going to do anything we're infringing on these human rights of anybody in the world. I mean, that's what the UN has created in a way, right? and why can't we respect that, you know?
Well, I go back to what you said. We forgot to talk and communicate one another. As you said, you worked overseas quite well. We spend more time, for example, more people in these countries have received training on what democracy is than most of us here in the United States. I never received some of the training that I was responsible for giving, many of these countries. Uh, One of the things I always argue is that what happened for me as a an immigrant refugee came to the United States. Eighth grade civic class was probably the most important class I ever had about in my
Oh,
life.
it's a great class, right?
Well, because it taught me like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do in this thing called democracy.
Yeah.
It was sort of a playbook. I'm like,
How to be a citizen. Yeah.
yeah, and unfortunately, you don't have those. But
No, one of the most painful experiences of my whole life has been over the past year. After I was 2 years in Ukraine, building democracy as a part, I was working as a community development specialist, and part of that was anti-corruption training, right? I'm teaching them like how to build strong civil society so that we don't, so to avoid corruption. I come back and my president is manipulating their president in this unbelievable way, and he got impeached for it, right? And I'm like, I'm just burying my head in my hands and saying, like, I just spent 2 years of my life as a volunteer teaching these folks about what is right and wrong in governance and corruption, and my president just deliberately manipulated their new president and tried to bend him to his will in the worst way that's ever been shown. I'm not saying that other American presidents weren't corrupt. Of course they were, here and there, but never so blatantly, so obviously, so callously, so, publicly, in a way that was embarrassing to our people.
look, but here's let me. I'm just tell you what I do. The day that it comes where one person, a president of the United States, also has that much power that can set the precedent for the world, then I think that we're in serious problem because then all those institutions that we've created over the last 200 years proven to be completely weak. And I'm still, as an American citizen, and so as I said in the beginning, I'm a New York nationalist, although I don't live there, we live in D.C. area now at the moment, but we still have really strong institutions that distinguishes us from all the other countries. We're going to have elections coming up now, and we'll make the changes if necessary. What I'm afraid of is that everybody seems to be focusing on saying it's that person's fault. I go, wait a minute, it's not. It can't be one person as much as
Oh, it's our fault.
and one is it's our fault in many ways, and then we have to say what is our role in this. I always start off by saying, listen, I come from the nonprofit sector. What do we do? We've seen this 1,000 times. What do we do?
Hmm. What do you do?
Well, I mean, again, some of the things that we do is literally try to educate people on some of this stuff,
Hmm.
try to change the narrative, you know, try to get away from the finger pointing between you're right and wrong,
Yeah.
or try to create that critical space that Hannah and Annette always spoke about, which is very important to any society. So there are a lot of things. And then what I said earlier is going back to even small podcasts as ours, whatever, is that these are really positive things for our society because it allows us to exchange ideas. You and I never met before.
Yeah.
Send me an email. And I said, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
As a citizen, as someone who believes in this, it is my obligation to see if I could pass on my ideas and messages as much as I can.
I
So,
appreciate that. Thank you for.
no, not some. Thank you on your side. Though, thanks.
Yeah.
So,
No, I'd say that absolutely. I don't blame Trump for being Trump, right? He always was. He's a
it's too
symptom.
bad.
He's a symptom of what's going on in American society right now. And he may have been a good salesman to capitalize on that, but credit to him on that, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's where he's at. Um, you recently had a chat on your podcast about anti-corruption work in Brazil.
Right.
Have you had experience working in the Brazilian system at all?
I have. Um, so you mentioned about the whole idea that my podcast. It's not a matter of promoting, but it's the idea was really to bring people and have them talk about what worked and didn't work. And the Brazilian experience is one of the fascinating experience where with $14,000 they literally drafted 75 laws, which is unheard of in international
Right,
development,
really unheard of.
and pro bono work and and the few times I went to Brazil, I actually went down to the Amazon there because of related to uh, sustainability or climate change. So it
Hmm.
was really very little that I was had direct experience. It was more really learning from the gentleman I was interviewing at that time.
Hmm.
And again, I mean, the problem is very wide. Now, the one thing that I would say about Latin America in general is that their civil societies are very strong, but they learned a lot from their experiences in the 60s and 70s.
Hmm.
I mean, they are, and the role of the church is, in the most positive sense, is very
Yeah.
strong. And this fascinated me, unlike Central and Eastern Europe, which, civil society exists only to take money from any donuts one's given them.
Hmm.
Latin America is not the case. They won't take money, for example, from the US government. They will, and they're very selective about it. And it's also very grassroots, and it's also driven by women in general, and has sort of it ticks off almost every one of the major boxes, which I become absolutely fascinated by more and more now that in fact, I'm trying to work now in Mexico and elsewhere, and learn a lot from them. And I wish I known a lot more about it when I was working in Central Eastern Europe in my days. Um, but in any event, I mean, what I try to do there is just give these people a platform and an opportunity to talk about what works, doesn't. And my audience is maybe similar like yours, a lot of academics, a lot of students, a lot of people in the international development field asking the same kind of questions. So,
That's really interesting. What do you have coming up in future podcasts? What
uh,
topics would you like to cover?
the next one, in fact, is we're going to talk about trying to work with refugees. In fact, from somebody from the International Office of Migration, work with refugees right now during the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges they're facing.
Absolutely. From do you know from which regions?
He covers, God, I think it covers what, Jordan, Lebanon. I'm not sure if he said. I know that he was also in, I think those areas right now in the Syria were impacted by the Syrian war. So, but again, unfortunately, I'm supposed to have interviewed him this week. I just simply haven't had the time. But that's my next. That's the next
Cool.
one I have lined up.
Very cool. Um, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation. Do you have any questions for me you'd like to explore?
Brandon, listen, congratulations. I know that you just started the podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, it was a really interesting topic, and I'm sorry for asking a lot about the Balkans there, but it's such an interesting region, and how can I pass up the opportunity when I'm talking to somebody I know is quite knowledgeable about it?
You're very kind with those words. Again, thank you. And really, I wish you the best of luck with your podcast. I think it's a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah. If
Uh,
people want to check out your show, how can they find it?
it's called the Global Development Experiment.
Cool.
And it's
You can find it on
available,
any platform, right?
exactly. It's on any window. So
Right on. Well,
thank you
it's
so much.
it's great, and thanks for joining me tonight. And I'll catch up with you later.
Yes. Take care of yourself. Bye now. Thanks.
Bye.